Okay, so the first question of the evening is, as a non-tech founder in the very, very early stages of developing MVP or any new product, what is their approach should be, if at all, in selecting technologies at that stage? Kabir.
Yeah. So again, my main thing is that I'm a techie. I am very techie. I am a CTO and all of that. Now, the first thing you need to start with technology is not technology at all. So everyone will tell you that you need to build MVP. It's going to cost you $500,000 or $1 million, or someone will tell you it's going to be only $40,000, but they will actually trick you up, and then you will end up spending $4 million without realizing, and most likely most startups will go bust. So what you need to start is validating your idea. You don't need technology to validate your idea. Start writing it on paper, get it through user surveys and user feedback. Go down Berg Street Mall, ask people if your problem is really a problem to people, and how many people are actually saying it's a problem. First, you need to know that. Once they know that it's a problem, then get some mock-ups. You don't need anything. Just mock up the screen, even if it's a whiteboard for now or a pen and paper. Get that validated before you build it, because the cost of not doing that is massive. And when you talk to any technical team, they will tell you it'll take, let's say, 100 days. Tell them to finish it in 5. And tell them how can they finish it in 5. If they say they can't, go talk to someone else. Don't talk. So technology people are very notorious people. They have a habit of making things very complicated and very time consuming and very costly. So you need to find the ones who can actually make it simple. Technology is definitely complex. I'm not denying that, but you need to find people who can actually make it simple and get that results through quickly. So it is not going to be easy, but that's probably the easiest part. If you miss that and then you commit to it, so try to produce your product within a couple of weeks from absolute zero. Try to produce it, even if it's pen and paper based for now or screenshot based. Lean Startup is a very good tool and it's a book. I would actually encourage you guys, if you actually are trying to come up with a product idea, Lean Startup is very good. I'll type in a few things. Lean Startup and HCD are good frameworks. So use them without going through that book. Don't bother. I mean, you can probably read at least or take a Udemy course. It might be worth spending 4 hours on those guys rather than million hours in a startup, because they will wipe out all the unnecessary waste in your product.
Okay.
So I would definitely encourage that.
Thanks, Abhi. So validation is the most important one, as Abhi described anyway, and do it with almost least or no cost. That's the fundamental point there. Yeah. As if you are progressing to the next stage, in theory, what technologies are getting used, you can say that it is very, very least relevant, because again, if you need an MVP and a working prototype to develop it, you could use anything. And it's only, I believe, after you move on from MVP to going to the first customer in a production environment, then you need to take the technology choices a bit more seriously. And then the two sides again is whatever you already have, it's easy to keep building on it, but 99% of the times they're not architected for a proper application for scalability, security, and also performance. So yes, beyond MVP and taking first few customers is okay. Doesn't matter what it is, but once you start going beyond that, it is a good opportunity to re-architect and make it proper, so you could actually capture the data. We'll talk more about the data later, but capturing and doing it properly is always recommended. Yes, Avi, you want to say something?
Yeah, so there are a few more stages before we get to that point. So when we are trying to say MVP, the definition of MVP is probably the big issue. Each person has a different definition of MVP. And MVP means minimum viable product, right? So when you say viable, what does that really mean? Does it mean profit, or does it mean you can sell, or does it mean you can actually get a customer to actually onboard? So there are three different things and three different levels. As a startup, the biggest problem is that you're running out of cash or your own personal energy. Profit, then you can have all interesting problems about scalability and all of that. Don't try to build the scalability, robustness, and all of those things up front before you get to profit. You need to focus on getting revenue quickly, and that is more important. Sure, you don't want to do illegal things. As long as you're not doing illegal things, everything else is fine.
And
right? So
and keep it secure.
So as long as you are doing that for the right thing of the customer, and once you get to that point, every problem is a good problem. You can't scale. That's a great problem to have because you're already in profit. You're making money. Now you can scale. You can spend money. Otherwise, you can't. Otherwise, you will always be sucking up to investors, and that's a very hard thing. It's not an easy game when it comes to getting investors on board. People might think that it is easy, but that's not. The odds are 1 in 1,000.
Okay. Thanks, Avi. And on the very similar lines, one of the other common questions that I come across is, should I hire a developer either as a permanent or a freelancer kind of thing, directly manage them, or go to a service provider who actually like engaging an agency? Any thoughts on that?
So it is not a simple, should I do this or should I do this question. It's more about, it depends on your context. So what you need to do is that find someone who you can work with, and it works for you cost and value equation wise. So sometimes there could be a company that's actually quite cheap and they actually are working out for you better. Sometimes it's actually some offshore partners. Do it. I mean, use Fiverr.com or freelancer.com or something. You need to try and see what works for you. Sometimes you can't deal with people overseas as a personal thing. Sometimes people like to actually work with someone who's next to them. Even Sydney is hard for them because I'm not in Sydney, kind of. So you really need to see what works for you. Now, one of the things that Lean Startup actually talks about is something called A/B testing. A/B testing means you are trying both. Don't go full speed with someone. Try first. Try what works. Like try a local person or company and then try overseas. See what works out better. You need to try them both. And once you go, this is working better, then go full speed with that. So that's the same approach that you need to do with almost any idea. You think, there are two choices. Don't try to guess what's right. Pick both and try both and see what's working and go full speed with that. And that's how you actually eliminate the problem of figuring out what to do next. Because you need to assume and you need to truly believe everything that you know is wrong. Otherwise, you just cannot make a startup. It's simple as that. If you think you know, then you probably lost the game already.
So there are a couple of other points to extend is, I've seen a few of my clients in two scenarios. One is that they have hired developers on their own. And also they have hired an agency, doesn't matter whether it is local or offshore. In both cases, one of the common issues there was the founder doesn't have access or doesn't even know where the source code is or those things. So the issue with that is if it is not working and if they want to change, they are kind of stuck in the sense of that person. And when they wanted to come across to us, they're saying that, hey, I like you and we want to engage you, but we have spent so much money on this source code and we don't even know how it is. So This is one of the key things from a risk management point of view or governance, doesn't matter what title you give. The key advice is, like Abhi said, try whatever works for you, but have that control on source code access at least, so you can switch. So otherwise you don't have an option. So yes. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, you definitely need to have your IP in your hands all the time.
Yeah. So
not just could be anything. Yeah.
Okay. And also looking at I think Prashant was saying earlier, the UX. So the next question is more like how much of the user experience focus should be at what stage?
Okay. So when it comes to startup, I wrote down a list of 83 things that you need to do right all the time
83.
Without fail. 83, only 83. If you don't do one, you are in a mess, kind. So UX is definitely one of them. So when you say UX, there are again multiple definitions based on who you ask. There is user interface. That's purely about how does it look, it just appealing or not. And then there is the experience where you are actually generating the emotions purely based on how you are doing things. And then there is customer experience. Like how does a customer actually feel? User is one, but who's the customer? And how, so there is that part. And then there is the brand experience called BX. So they're all slightly different, but they do have a bit of a mixture. So you need to think about all of them. And there are 4 things that you need to think, because it is another important thing. And that's why I think all of those things are important, and that's why it is a bit harder. Yeah, but you need to get them right and evolve. Always evolve. Don't try to build everything up front. Evolve.
Definitely. And also, just rephrasing that in my own words, there is no something called as perfection. There is always an improvement. So yeah, deploy it and then take feedback. So the focus when it comes to user experience is talking to your users. So don't make too many assumptions. Obviously, you have to start with something, but have an ongoing engagement with the user group. Take their input in changing and making their decisions along those lines, rather than purely a person's one or two people making the call. So that's my thing.
Yeah, it's good to write down all your assumptions, because they're all assumptions and you probably don't know, but it's good to have a list of them and validate them with data. You need to really have evidence saying that that assumption is valid because I spoke to 100 people and they said that's the problem, and that is how they like to solve it, all of them.
Yeah. And also, as Abhi said, I also agree with that in the sense that it is very important, but you could spend, quite a few weeks, not only that time it takes, but also quite an amount of dollars under the UX, depending on who you engage. So there are quite a few agencies who only do UX, and the simple bill goes to 6 digits straight away, even you haven't made anything. So that's too expensive, in my opinion. But more importantly, have that focus. That's the most important thing. So obviously, pick a partner who doesn't going to break your back.
Yeah, look, definitely. I have used a company called Ponda, and they seem to be quite effective. 3 weeks, they'll finish off the UX. First week is probably where you get most of the value, and after that, they just consult because there will be some enhancements, and $12,000.
That's it.
That's done. That's completely done from, and they really produce good value. Again, it's $12,000. I have used them probably a few years now, but they are really good. And in terms of the definition of perfection, I have a slightly different definition. If it is good enough for now, that's perfect. So you need to look at it that way, and don't build something for next after 6 months. You need to look only for next 6 months. That's good enough. After 6 months, that's a different story, because no one knows. You might even get COVID, or it can go away.
And especially being a startup, the biggest thing that is constant is the change, right? So which means that investing a lot of money upfront doesn't make sense because most likely it will change. So solve today's problem and keep moving. So, okay, so just to remind everybody on the call, please do raise a hand or type the questions, and either of that I have sent, I just keep moving on with my questions that I have. I do have plenty. Hopefully, we will reach out to the most of them. But more importantly, this is a session for all of you. So if you have any really questions that you need to get answered straight away, please do post them. So thank you.
So just a quick one. I want to quickly understand how many questions do we have and how much time do we have?
Like I prepared lots of questions as a backup as always, but I wanted to make it interactive. So don't worry. So questions will.
What's next? 200, 500, 10?
So typically it is one question and responding time is around 3 minutes or to 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So
I'll keep it that.
30 questions. So
30?
30, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Like we do this over multiple sessions, but today we're focusing on non-tech founders, and because they cover every aspect of the startup, I try to cover them, but usually we break it down to a specific topic each week or each month, I should say. Okay, without any further ado, next question is around like how do we, like I'm building an app, or the question is actually, should I build an app of only a mobile app or a browser-based app as well, or both? And also if it is mobile app, iOS and Android are the popular ones, and should I go for both of them, or should I only do one of them? So these are the kind of questions that usually come. So what are your thoughts? As in, obviously, this is a very generic scenario. We don't know the use case in here. But if it is a generic and common, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So the question comes to, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Who are your target audience? What is the best way to deliver them an application? Now, people might say, you need to do this first and do this first. And if you do Android, you can't do iOS and all of that. Try to pick a technology that you write once and you can deploy anywhere with a bit of a help, but you should not repeat things. This is something that most techies will do. They will say you won't get the same experience and all of that. We don't need that same experience. We need similar enough experience. So if you get a similar enough experience on iOS and Android, that's good enough. I mean, you are going to cut down your development time by 3 times. So there is a good no-code platform, which apparently there is a good talk, and most non-tech founders are actually able to develop things quickly using that. Bubble has been one of the really good one, and that helps as well. So by all means use that, and that could actually give you a ability where you can use multiple devices and web at the same time.
And do we need to develop both iOS and Android was the question. So the focus there is, if I just want to develop my mobile app, can I get away with doing one of them?
So it depends on the market, right? So it's a market in Australia. In Australia, iOS is popular. If you look at the rest of the globe, it might be Android. So again, if you pick a platform like Bubble, or if you are doing it natively with Flutter or React or some React Native, so you could actually target both at the same time with the same source code. So you don't have to choose because it's always there.
Fantastic.
Otherwise.
Yeah. So with respect to the next question in terms of the browser-based application. So one of the common questions that I get is, can I use WordPress or the like?
Look, that's a very common question from non-tech founders or some tech as well. Look, if it works, why not? So if you need to switch, that's a later situation. If you're already in profit, you can hire as many people. So if it works, that's fine. Most of the time, I would say Bubble might actually work out much better than WordPress because it's more easier learning curve.
Yeah.
Yeah, even a Udemy course might actually get to the speed that developers can't come.
So I think this question comes from usually the people who has got some kind of experience with WordPress, either in their previous work or I'm doing WordPress page because it's very intuitive. And they said that I already know WordPress, so I'll just use it to develop an application. So that's one of the common reasons I ask, why do you want to use WordPress? Because I already know that.
Yeah. So there is the part that you already know. So what you're trying to think about over here is that what is the time it takes for you from the time you have an idea to that being in production? So time from idea to production is the main thing. You're trying to shrink it down. So it has to be really quick. Whatever tool gets you there quickly is the one that you're after. Ideally, you want your idea time to idea to production within days.
Yeah.
Because that's actually quite key. Yeah.
And going back to the very first topic of not investing too much money on tech, so this aligns with that. But you need to focus on what exactly are you trying to validate, one of the assumptions, right? So in this case, WordPress or any of these content management, the CMS are very good at doing mockups or doing the layouts of the screens and everything. And also they do take a bit of JavaScript or PHP to do some basic programming. So in this case, if you have that programming knowledge, then it would help. But if you don't have it, and the typical websites don't need any programming knowledge because it's all drag and drop and you have a lot of widgets. So depending on the use case that your application is about and how much of the functionality and different screen flows are required, need to be considered in making that choice, in my opinion. Otherwise, going to something like bubble.io is something is quite recommended because it is designed for a new application development, not just a website. Do you agree with that, Avi?
Yeah, agree.
Okay, good. So would like to focus next thing on the business side. So typical risk management comes, I think, very, very later into the development when you get investors. They start asking questions, and do you have that? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have this? But a generic business and non-tech question is, what are the typical risks that we should look at, apart from taking off that 80, did you say 83? 83.
Apart from 83, apart from 83, there's nothing else I know of. Otherwise, it will be 84 and 85. So look, the key risk, again, it'll be probably one of them, right? So the key risk is that you don't want to run out of money, emotional energy that you have, and you need to make sure you have the right people, the right attitude, people who are driven to actually get through quickly. So you need people who actually are focusing on the target, and they have to be looking at getting the result quickly. Not people who will say, yeah, I'm working on it. So you need to focus on people who can actually say, I'm going to finish it tomorrow. I'm going to get you this day after tomorrow. Not like I'm working on it. So that's not enough. So you need to focus on that.
Okay. And so with respect to the different stages, obviously that changes, right? So obviously, when you have the seed level, that's different to when you're scaling. So what are your thoughts on that? What stage you are in the business?
Look, if you are scaling, that means that you have profit to make. So if you are in profit, you can do whatever you want. So there is that. It's not there is no pressure anymore. However, again, if you're saying, again, regardless, you still need to continue that attitude. You are trying to actually get maximum with minimum. And that is something that you still need to keep regardless of how much money you're making, because you get the results because of that attitude, not because of the fact that you are there now you can spend. Just because you have money, that is not a good reason to spend money or energy and people. Just hiring people for the sake of it is not the right thing. It doesn't matter if it's $1 or $1 billion, you still need to think in the same way. Sure, you may not want to spend more time thinking about spending $1 because you might be earning $1 million every month, but still, you need to think about it in the same way.
Okay, so moving to the next question. So initially, in the early stages, let's say most of the founders use external agencies to help them with the product development. In that scenario, at what point and how do we approach the founder to have build the internal team?
So in terms of that, when you're saying internal team, right? So as a founder, what are your skill sets? And this is something you need to really take a good hard look at. So can we manage people? So that's one key thing when it comes to the founder, right? You need to have good relationships with people skills, right? So some people say, I can't work under my boss, so I'm going to start a business. So to me, it is probably the wrong thing to say. If you can't work with one customer who is your boss, how are you going to manage 100 customers? Because they're all your boss. And then you have partners, and then your suppliers. It is not going to be easy, right? So you definitely need to have the people skills to actually manage people. Otherwise, go hire someone who could have that. And what is your craft? I mean, if you are a marketer, then that is your craft. Can you manage people? That's another one. Do you have prior experience to actually do that? And are your team happy with that? And do you have experience in terms of making deals with contracts and partnerships and who can actually collaborate? If that is the case, that is your skill. So use that. So with all of those things, and it's not like a simple answer. You need to look at what are you good at and what does the company need? What are the gaps? And try to fill it that way. People leadership is one. Finance is one. Are you good with money? Do you know how things are working with the money? And you need to have that. And do you have marketing, sales? That's a totally different thing. Sales and marketing are very different. People don't seem to realize that, and that's okay. But you need to know there are all different parts of the company that you need to bring together, and that's what actually makes you a successful founder. Initially, you might be one person band, and that's life you have to go through.
Yeah. And also, I think one of the other visions or dreams every founder could have is I want to build my own team eventually. So definitely at what stage you are in and building that capability with bringing in either in the concept of co-founders or building in employees with shares like a CTO who can bring in the technical management expertise, which is one of the gaps that you might have originally. Is one way to go, and also then you start expanding the team slowly in that sense. So, but again, the key point here is to assess the skills that as an organization that you have, and identifying the gaps very, very honestly, and then trying to fill those gaps through the human resources is the key. And as long as it's financially viable, I personally don't see anything much different. But if you see the other objectives, like I want to have my own team and having that commitment, not like contractors, then you need to assess the skill set that is available to you.
So there is another thing over there that I do have a bit of a trouble, and it might be a controversial answer. So in the statement, when we say, I want to have my own team, the reason seems to be, I want to have my own team. So it's not because the company needs it. So that to me sounds like a big problem. If you want something and not the company, then you are going to lose the company because you are putting yourself ahead of the company. I mean, you should be the problem that you're trying to solve should be much bigger than you. And you shouldn't be having a startup because you want to have your team. If that is the case, that's totally different. And you're just going to spend money and not really get anything out there.
Yeah.
So you need to focus on actually doing the right thing for the company. It is not about you. And if you find someone who can actually do a much better job than you should be able to give that away. Otherwise, you can't really run because you don't have the emotional energy and it will drain the hell out of you.
Definitely, I think this falls into the controversial thing that you mentioned, because typically there is an emotional attachment to the product, and this my business to the probably 99.9% of the founders anyway. But again, being pragmatic and being realistic would really help to get over that emotional side and achieve the real outcomes.
Yeah, and the good thing would be to actually have a board who can keep you honest and get you that reflection that you need. Every startup would need a board. Find someone who actually has successfully exited startups by selling them or making profit for 7 years. If you find someone who runs startup, that's a total different thing. I mean, anyone can get an ABN and say, I got a startup now. I'm running a startup. I'm an entrepreneur. Yeah, I hired 2 people. No. When you say startup, it's successful, you have to get to the point where you sold it. You have to wrap up. Until then, it is not accounted for anything. You have a product, well, that's not enough. You have users, that's not enough. You have profit, okay, now we are talking. And can you do that for next 7 years or sell it to a lot of money? Then that's successful. So find people like that. They might be rare, but find them and talk to them. Listen to the people who actually make sense. If they're always going to say yes, well, they're not the guys.
Thanks, Abhi. And as you touched upon the board, maybe that was a ad hoc question that I was trying to come up with is, what should the board look like, and when should that founder start having the people as a board, as a formal board?
On day one. So try to source them. Find someone online, LinkedIn, beg, borrow, do whatever you want. But the point is that you need someone to look at your company objectively, not with emotion, and who you can say bye-bye to anytime. And all you need is just a coffee catch up with them or conversation, or bring them all together at once. However you do it, you need to get advice on how to move faster, cheaper, better, and simpler.
That's great. So, okay, now looking at security. So being a non-technical founder, most of the times they know that in theoretically security is very important, and with all good intentions, they want to keep the data of their customers and themselves and their employees in every angle secure. But how do they assess, and what are the things or the pointers as self-check out of the 83 that you can pick? So they can ask these questions, and if one of them, or at least one of them, is no, then they need to get some help or something like that.
Security is an important one. When it comes to security, it becomes a three-point item over there. Most people may not think about it. So security, compliance, and governance, they call it GRC. So all of them are important. However, you need to do enough for the startup stage that you are in right now. Once you start getting quite a lot of customers, then you need to increase it more. So there is all sorts of standards. If you are in finance, you have some security labels that you need to have, and it is good to have. Now, if you don't have it, you can still get away saying, I'm aiming for this. So we are compliant with, or this is our standard. You can always say, I follow ISO 27001. And you might be aiming for it, and that's okay. Maybe you are not audited, that's okay. When a customer goes, show it to me because I'm going to sign up, that's when you go rush and then get through and pass all the checks. And until then, you don't have to go take that seriously. You still need to, at heart, take security seriously, understand the fundamentals. This is another thing that security and compliance team will make it very complicated. And they'll say this is not easy and this is going to take quite a lot of time and money. Probably not the guys. At heart, you need to look at the fundamentals. Why are we actually trying to get security? Are you trying to do it because someone said so? Wrong reason. Are you trying to do it because that is the right thing to do for your customer? Yes. Now you can start. Now you can simplify. If you start otherwise, you are going to make a big, massive mess, thinking that security is this big and you're not following for the sake of following, but not truly understanding. Once you understand, security becomes simpler, compliance becomes simpler. So there are only few things over there in security and compliance and governance. We just need to look at that fundamentally, and then you can talk and you can achieve a very fine balance over there and get through quickly. I mean, certificates, to actually get them from absolutely nothing, it might only take a month.
Yeah, and very quick point on the expansion, Abhi, there is, you mentioned that just enough for that particular stage. I think that's probably the biggest confusion that people would have is what does it mean and what is enough? So can you give a quantifiable pointers to that, please?
Yeah. So is someone asking for it? Is someone asking for it is the question. Until someone asks for it, it's not needed. So when if you say that, hey, I'm compliant with ISO 27001 on your website, and you do what you think is your version of ISO 27001, that's a certificate. And until someone asks you to get the certificate, don't bother getting the certificate, and don't bother actually hiring someone to actually get a big list and say, yep, I got them all. So that's good enough. So unless someone is asking for it, you don't have to build it.
Yep. So a few points from my side is, I think the least and the very easy thing anybody could do is just putting an SSL to your website. And if you have a browser-based application, just put SSL. So when people are trying and looking at it, nowadays they get that nice fancy green bar, giving the confidence that you are secure. So that is, it doesn't cost much compared to anything anyway. So that's point.
Agree. I totally agree. There is always that cost and value equation, and what is the minimum cost and how much value can you get? As long as you are targeting 1% of the cost to get maximum value, and you put everything inside that, that's good enough.
Yeah. And if you happen to have the mobile phone apps, usually they are certified by the app stores anyway. So which means that you're piggybacking on their security and their checks and everything. So by the fact that the app has been approved in the app stores, you get the confidence. So you don't have to do anything more than what you're already doing.
Yeah.
But look at the questions they ask. So this is what my experience has been. So when you're submitting an app to the app stores, they ask you many questions. So take the questions very seriously, not just to respond enough to get an app approved. They are actually could become part of your business plan. So they are very important questions that they ask, and that's why they ask. So I would actually take that question and make that as a discussion within your team to really see what does it mean in every aspect of the application, not just the mobile app. So that's a very simple thing. You have the questions there, and you don't need to get a consultant, a security expert, to get that very valuable couple of questions. The other thing is,
go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So the very other important point is the privacy part. So there's a security and there is privacy. So just to read through the GDPR information as to, like, there are very nice YouTube videos which explains what the GDPR is about. It's a European one, but it is a very, very well done. And I believe that the rest of the world is actually taking it as a standard anyway. So, but as a business owner, so I'm not talking about a founder here, as a business owner and as a business, that forms part of your risk management. So you might not have to do anything immediately, but understanding what ticks off to be compliant with GDPR itself will give you a lot of tools to have some very good conversations with your team, and then deciding whether you need to do anything on that elements or not. So that's it. Okay, so that's a simple thing about the security and the privacy. So looking at the 7 minutes list, I got a couple of topics. So I'm picking one question for each of my topic areas. So hopefully we will be able to reach it out. It has in the last few years, I think there is a common theme that is going on is data is the new currency, data is the new oil, data is something, data is data. So what are your thoughts to a non-technical founder as to how they should look at the data and what they should do at what point of the journey? Too many questions in one.
So when we say data, I'm going to interpret that as evidence. So I think there is data means like, imagine there is a big massive spreadsheet. You need to look at data as like that, but it is of no value unless you actually get information out of the data. Like, what does the data tell you? If I have, let's say, a spreadsheet of entire list of people names and whether they have tested positive or negative in a big massive Excel sheet, that is data. It doesn't tell me anything. But if I break it down and go, okay, how many cases did we get in Victoria today? How many did we get in Sydney today? That is information you can use, you can act on. So there is a difference between data and information. Information is something you can actually act on, you can make decisions based on. Data is just stuff. So what you need to look at is that, can you actually extract that information that you can act on? So, and what is it that you're trying to act on? Sometimes the data doesn't necessarily support things. For example, maybe you haven't collected data that actually says that, hey, I have COVID patient, but I don't know where they are from, like at least the state or the postcode. So start collecting that so you can make decisions. So it's a cycle, and you need to look at information, not just data. And how can you best use it? What are your needs? How do you need to use it? And how can you use the data? That's the question. That's where you would start.
Definitely. Thanks, Avi. And from my point of view, so this expanding on what Abhi said, that information is the most important one, but you need to start with the business problems and understanding your customer data as the question. And then you ask yourself, what information do you need? And then work backwards as to get this information, what data do we need? And then the question comes whether are you actually capturing that or not? So a simple example is if you want to know if you're doing the retail space and if you want to do some local marketing, local area marketing, then you need to know who is actually, what is your local, let's say 5 kilometers radius. And then I want to understand my customers who are my customers within 5 kilometers radius. So then that's the business problem and that you want to understand. And then the information that you need is list of customers who are within that 5 kilometers radius. But if you go to the data and if you're not capturing the postcode or the suburb, then you don't have the data to get to the information stage. So you should always start at I'm talking about in the early stages of the startup, always start with a question from the business point of view. And most of the times, the founder and the team are heavily focused on the functionality, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But I would also highly recommend spending around a few discussions around what information do we need and what type of customer problems that we should see and how the customer understanding customers is required. And then having a parallel strategy to capture this information / data should be part of a regular discussions on a monthly basis. So that's my 2 cents out of that. So we have 3 minutes. I do have one last question, but anybody would like to? Okay, so there is a question asking about the 83 things. Abhi, are you happy to share?
It might sound quite boring and quite rude and pedantic if I actually share them. So
the answer is no.
Let me think. Yeah, I mean, look, I am very different compared to most people you meet. So I want everything happening and finishing in a day. And I guess it's that you need to have that driven focus that is important. Yeah, look, I can share that. Let me try and make it a bit softer before I share.
Okay. So I will work with Avi on that, and if he's happy to share, I will share that with all of you. Okay, so using the last 2 minutes, I wanted to touch upon the very hot topic, which has been almost, you see newspaper, I think there are 50% of the newspaper covers this, which is AI and machine learning and intelligence and everything. So for a non-tech founder, what are your suggestions to consider? What is the role of AI? First of all, I would like to say that if the founder doesn't understand the difference between an advanced, nice, fancy dashboard report to the actual intelligence that is built, so please do some learning in that space. So putting a report is not intelligence, it is actually learning something new. So the machine learning, the second word, the learning, has to be there to be qualified, in my opinion, to starting a journey in that direction. So having said that as the definition, so Abhi, nowadays everybody wants to do these fancy things, and especially in the startup world for the non-tech founder. What are your pointers?
So buzzwords, they're all buzzwords.
Okay.
People think they're cool and they will use it because they're cool. So you're not building, you shouldn't be building things because it's got AI. You should be focusing on your problem for the customer. Build things for that. And if AI is the right tool to do it, sure. If machine learning is the one, sure. Blockchain is another one. They will always come and they will always say this is actually important. That's not what you're trying to do. Your job is to actually solve the customer problem. Pick the vehicle that actually does that. And again, all of these buzzwords. And when you talk about AI, it is very hard for very good techies to convince me that they know AI, because they don't. It is a big umbrella term that is thrown around quite a lot of things, and it's got so much in there. And they say it's AI. Sometimes it's just a smart algorithm. It's not really an AI. There is no machine thinking about it. So I need to feed it. If I need to feed it, then what is artificial about that? If I need to train it, there is what's artificial about that? Let it actually do it. So there's all of those things. And look, there is quite a lot of them. They're all buzzwords. Don't go for the buzzwords. I mean, sure, you might probably want to use them on your website. So people who fall for the buzzwords will fall for you, but don't fall for it yourself. They're all buzzwords. Does it solve the problem? Does it get you there quicker, cheaper, better, faster, and simpler? That's what you need to focus on. If someone tells you that they have an AI solution, it doesn't mean anything. If someone tells you they can actually solve your problem, yes, that means something.
Definitely. And so just reinforcing or repeating what we have discussed in the past is this also has to be aligned with the customer business problem. So unless you start with the business problem and then you go to the step of asking for information, and sometimes the information is requires these advanced tools. So that is where the decision needs to be made. Okay, I cannot just get the information that I need purely based on the data analysis and any reporting that I have. So which means that I need to do a little bit more than that. And that is where the starting the journey would be happening. Okay, now what should I do? So should I be learning, should we be using the simple concepts of algorithms, which is a little bit more fancy reporting, or real machine learning? And first of all, machine learning is the way to go. There's a deep learning. There is so many different aspects of it that needs to be done. But again, start with the business problem. And if it happens to be one of the possible solutions is doing machine learning, then you go down that path rather than, hey, I want to do some AI machine learning, and okay, now what problems it will solve. So that is an expensive, not so value generating approach, in my opinion. Okay, so I would like to conclude there as a formal session. Anybody would like to ask any questions before we wind up for tonight?